In what aspects?
Well, it's like I read an article today in the South China Morning Post, which I'm beginning to like. I was not very trusting of it for a long time, but it gets better. But you know, the Biden administration was moving along the same, and selling some highly sophisticated tech equipment for building new submarines that the Trump administration has started. And I think they're going down a very dangerous path with the Taiwanese because I'm actually in the middle. We haven't talked about, but I'm middle. I'm almost done with it. Reading the biography of Deng Xiaoping by Ezra Vogel. You ever read that?
Me?
Yeah,
No.
actually pretty good. It was slow. First 150 pages were slow, but it's interesting. And I always admired Deng Xiaoping because I think he had a very difficult task following Feng after, with the whole Mao and everything
Yeah,
else.
yeah, me
Very
too.
difficult.
Hmm.
But he had a line that I said I would tattoo it if I believed in tattoos, I would tattoo it on me. That his whole direction was I was going practice is the sole criterion for judging truth. And I
Right.
think that, right? And I
Yeah,
think it's
he
a
said that.
very powerful, and that's why he was successful in guiding China through those terrible times. And they were tough
Hmm.
times. They were tough times. He made, but it just keeps coming back and back and back. It's Taiwan. It's always been Taiwan, even with when he was afraid that there was going to be war with the Soviets, which most people gloss over. But you know, don't forget the Chinese invaded or went to war with Vietnam, right? In
Hmm.
79 or 78, 79. Um, there were these. This is not to be taken lightly, and I think the United States has put themselves in a very difficult situation. But we've talked about this for a long time. That Taiwan was always a tripwire. Hong Kong's a sideshow. I still believe that.
Yep,
It's
it
not.
is.
It's not for the people who live in Hong Kong. Believe me, it's very difficult. But for the most part, sideshow to me. So,
Yeah.
what are you thinking about there?
Um, I'm thinking about just um, I would say the Chinese administration right now, the political right now, uh, has has a tendency of testing um, where the line is, where the red line is, right? They've been expanding their military presence in the southern China Sea, um, and they want to see what the Americans will do or will think, and then they will expand this action if Americans doesn't provide uh, a, enough or an equal response. So I think selling the tech to the Taiwanese for them to build submarines is a equal response to what China's been doing for the last 5 years in the southern China Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's just a response to that to combat their uh, rising military presence.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. And because Philippines are out of control right now, it doesn't it doesn't really follow along what the Americans do. So Philippines are gone, and Malaysia, Singapore, they're staying uh, they're staying out of this U.S.-China conflict in the southern China Sea, so they cannot be counted on. And what's left? It's just Taiwan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. It's just an equal response. It's a response to what the Chinese have been doing for the last 5 years, and they're both testing each other's baseline, where that line is. You know.
Oh, yeah. It's a good way. Yeah, it's really kind of what the article in the South China Morning Post, I think was, well, that's what I drew from it, is that, okay, everybody's wants to find out where that is, because the Chinese have certainly said Taiwan is the critical. They, when they ramp up the rhetoric, of course, it's to remind everybody that this is an internal domestic situation, right?
Right, right. And the Xinjiang problem, it's also an internal affair. So
You know what? And that's an interesting one. Good. I'm glad you brought that up. So, yes, the Uyghurs. But I'm going to let this go, and then we'll. So it is. It's another. And the United States came out in the Biden administration. Throwing punches, talking about how they viewed it as genocide. That's a very harsh word, And I said, if you're
yeah,
on that road, you better commit to it in a big way, because you just, you know, you can't just throw that word out there. And then, so what's your response? And then I always come back to, well, the Turks and the Chinese, I'm sorry, and the Iranians grow ever closer to the Chinese. So, and the Iranians, of course, like to portray themselves as the protector of all things Islamic in the world, because they're trying to push their, and yet here they are, getting closer and closer to the Chinese. So it's that's also a tough situation. And you know what? And if the Chinese say it's an internal affair, well, a lot of things jump up.
And on this front, what really concerns me is that Australian Parliament yesterday voted against to set this incident or this history, which the Chinese government kills the Uyghurs.
Yeah.
They refused to designate it as genocide.
Yeah.
They voted against it.
Yeah.
Australian Parliament.
Right. And a lot of times when these votes take place, of course, they're just, getting they're not binding. They're not binding. They're just trying to establish a criterion, I guess I would say at best. But there's a lot of moving parts here. But I don't think you want to ramp up the rhetoric too loud on either side.
Right.
And then the United States has to deal with the financial pact that Europe, or financial treaty that the Chinese signed with Europe. There are a lot of moving things here. And then, unlike under like in the 70s and 80s, I think the Chinese and Russians are actually finding, like we had a long discussion yesterday about Russia. I hated to go off on some of that stuff. But when you see the Chinese and Russians developing closer ties economically, of course, because Russia has energy and for sale, and the Chinese, of course, are always in need of energy. So a lot of, everybody looks at this with static eyes, and I think it's a gigantic mistake, because there are moving parts and they're in motion quickly here. So, and that Taiwan is a is a very important moving part in this.
Mm-hmm. And the energy purchases from Russia is not a necessity, but a gratitude, rather.
I'm sorry. What?
The energy purchases. The energy purchases.
Yeah.
From Russia.
Yeah.
Nowadays it's less than a necessity, but more like a gratitude.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's just building closer relations.
Right. It's for
Just
the relationship and for the defense coherism.
yeah, and the Chinese understand their strength there because when they say we're going to sanction you, and the Russians look at you, okay, go sanction us. We have a willing buyer,
Yeah.
right? You can
Yeah.
sanction me all you want. I have a willing buyer, and we don't even have to deal in dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, again, one of those moving parts I'm watching very closely because all the analysis becomes very static in my mind. And that static analysis always drives me up the wall because the world is always far more dynamic than people want to admit to. Because, when you built models, models are static.
And the recent actions that a couple new Chinese tech companies has been uh, slapped on the entities list,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's foolish. That's really foolish. I mean, if you don't have the merit to pass it to in local courts, just don't say it, right?
Right. Yeah. I know. I know. Right. Yeah. They throw out, and everybody's busy throwing out all kinds of, as I would say, crap because they're, what for headline? You don't need headlines. Better off
That
not.
just make you look bad, right?
Exactly. Oh yeah, absolutely. You look terrible. Did they not learn anything from Obama's red line in the sand? It was probably one of the great mistakes of U.S. foreign policy in the last, I'd say, since the Gulf of Tonkin, because it resulted in the muscling up. Russia muscled up because they said, "Oh, that red line means nothing." And what they got behind Assad, and now Russia has a phenomenal footprint in the Mideast, where they were totally pushed out of for
Mm-hmm.
for 20 years. So don't draw those lines if you're not, because yeah, they're nice headlines, but they get you in a lot of difficult situations. Well, I'm glad you came on because I wanted to see your views on, and I'm glad you brought up the Uyghurs too on top of it. So interesting, and it's going to hot up because the more you make it a central issue, it's kind of like becomes like the Crimea. Uh, well,
Yeah. So if
right?
you're gonna help them or not.
Yeah, right. Because okay, well, here's where I'm going to push. I'm going to find out just yeah, let's see how much you really are concerned.
Right. And I feel bad for the Uyghurs because they think the United States really have their back.
Oh yeah, right.
And it's the same things happened over and over again, right? The United States, the Congress, uh, singing songs, praising something, and demonizing or just talking down on others, and then they never go through with it.
Yeah,
It's
again,
just talk.
it's just talk, and you know what? And I will say one thing about the Chinese: they're very good at calling out your talk.
Right. They
That's
knew you wouldn't dare to do a thing.
yeah, because okay, let's find out. Let's find out. And when they find out that it's talk and not serious, then you put your especially your allies or potential allies in a very difficult situation because
Mm-hmm.
you don't really mean it. It's a good headline, good optic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, because Australians, they aren't stupid. They need China for business, and
yeah,
they are not calling this a genocide.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's the most important ally for United States in the Pacific Ocean territory.
Right. No,
So
right, right. Yeah, we see that,
yeah,
of course, in Japan, but Japan is very careful. I watch them very carefully, and they are very cautious.
They are treading this really light.
Yeah, they're
They
not.
haven't been speaking out.
No, they've been very reticent to make too much noise, which I also find interesting. I know what's his name, Jake, National Security Council, was just with. I have to get used to everybody who's running these, and the new Secretary of State. I know they're in Anchorage, talking to Chinese foreign minister, but first they went to Japan. So a lot of things again, a lot of movements, lots of movement.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for taking the time. Glad you came on. I haven't talked to you in a long time. I hope you're well. I was worried that you weren't well or something. So that's why.
No. I've been good.
Okay. All
Well,
right. Good.
drop in
Okay.
more, Michael. We miss you.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay. If you
right.
need me, just just send me an email. I'll pop.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ira.
Yeah, I'll hang on for a while. I'll be in here, but I'm going to mute myself. I got stuff to do. So,
All right. So let's because I recorded that conversation. Do you have any thoughts about tomorrow? And then
yeah, I do. You know, we're good. The press conference will be interesting, and the first question should be: is there a level where you would, where the Fed, where the FOMC might start to get nervous that rates were out of their control? A lot of articles. There was an article today from Alan Blinder. That's what I go.
Yeah.
It's written with such arrogance. I'm sorry. I just read through it. They're so sure. They're so cocksure, and yet they've been so wrong about people like that. I had that famous one-on-one with Alan Blinder back in 2007 on Bloomberg with Kathleen Hayes, and it was right before the onset of the great financial crisis, and I was maintaining that we were heading into a possible depression. I didn't use the word, but when we came back from break, he said, "Well, I don't think I was talking about a depression." And I said, "Well, thanks for clarifying that for me." But he was, just like Bernanke was, going into that very sanguine about it. Oh, remember, it was Bernanke who said, "Oh, housing is under control. We're not even worried about it. It's minimus." So when I hear all the forecasts that emanate from these, they're certainly good scholars, but good scholars don't necessarily make good practitioners. Again, I'll go back to the line. Practice is the sole criterion for judging truth. You can have all the theories you want, but that may be a harsh view for some people, but it is that view that turned China from where it was at in the mid 70s to where we are today. It was really that view. Now, does Xi, now that I really have a much better context to it, does Xi continue along that path? We don't know. We don't know.
Well, what did you read into that Xiaomi thing today?
What it was at the deal in Canada?
Yeah, they took them off their blacklist, I guess, right?
Oh, did they? You know what, Judd? I'm a little slow on the news. So did they?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. I'd have to go back and reread it because I read that stuff in the middle of the night, and sometimes I'm not retaining it. But I think it jumped like 10% last night in Hong Kong on that.
Oh, I didn't see it. So if you have it, I did not see it. So
I'll have to go take a look.
But as as Michael pointed out, look at what Australia did. Now the United States, Anthony Blixen was one of the first things he talked about was review what's happening in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs as genocide. And I said, wow, that's a very dangerous road to go. And I know, Anthony Blixen's history is, you know, his grandparents and parents were certainly affected. His dad with the Holocaust. So
Right.
he's very aware of it. But you still, if that's the case, if it is genocide, then I hold the world right now very accountable for doing nothing. You can't just throw it out and go, well, what are you doing? What are you doing to mitigate it? What are you doing to end it? Because genocide is a very powerful term, especially conjures up, you know, a lot to me because I lost a lot of family. And I know its meaning. And now you have Australia, as Michael said, you know, they didn't go that route. So what's going on here? And we need clarification because if you're going to make human rights part of the one of the major variables, let me put it that way, in your foreign policy and the way you deal with the Chinese, well, you better, you go down that road, you better prepare for what it unleashes and how far do you go to prevent that genocide? What are we going to have? Another Rwanda? Do we learn nothing? Do we learn nothing in the Balkans in the 90s when the Serbs were slaughtering Muslims? You know, Srebrenica, when the Dutch peacekeepers, yes, I know the Dutch who like to parade themselves as great moralists, as they stood by and watched 7,000 people killed and they did nothing. Dutch UN peacekeepers, nothing. So, you know, when you go, and I find it, you know, any type of political murders like that for political, I find it an action so deplorable and despicable that if you shout it and do nothing, does that make you almost a party to it? So very, very dangerous. And you heard Michael's voice, you know, even Michael's concerned about it. So, and then for the way the Aussies approach it. So there's a lot of question. And then of course, I always come back to the Iranians because I like to stick my finger in their eye.
Hell, people never learn. It's always the same deal over and over again.
Always. It's always the same friggin' deal. You know what? And you find ways to justify it in your own way, you know, quietly in your own way. I find it absolutely so despicable. I have really, I don't have my disdain for it, and those who throw it around are just bad. And history will judge, of course, but who cares what history judges? You know, if I wait for history to judge, I'll be waiting for some outcomes that I'm not wild about seeing. Well, let's go back. So the Fed, again, right now, again, we're seeing a little more correction, right? A little bit.
I just think this is a corrective phase up into the bonds, into this gap, and I don't know how far it's going to get.
No, but if they say nothing, so then again, so the question to Paul is, well, where's your comfort level? Where do you become so discomforted that you may have to change policy? Because if you don't speak to that, you know, I believe that there are, you know, that's why I mentioned the Blinder piece, because he talks about bond vigilantes and yeah, there's really who cares about them? Inflation, and goes to explain away why inflation has not mattered for the last 30 years, let's say. Of course, he was a participant in it. And I still say that the most important element to the inflation game will be what happens with the Chinese yuan, because it'll tell me a lot about what their designs are and what do they think will be. So, I mean, we see the yuan right now. I'm looking at dollar yuan. So let's all be on the same page.
Are you CNY or CNH?
I'm IUSD CNY.
Okay.
It's cash. 650 and a quarter,
Right,
right?
right.
We're well below the 200-week moving average, which is 670, 676. I'm using CQG numbers.
Right.
Go to the daily, I think it'll be, yeah, it's kind of like the same thing. So we're stabilized in here, right?
Yep. And we can't get, and I'm looking at the monthly cloud. So it's like 65.44. It's got to weaken through that to do anything.
Yeah. My area, I think it's going to go there, at the 625. We've talked about that before. You can go back and look in August of 15 when they started talking about weakening the yuan, and you saw that move from 620 to 644. I'm on that in July of 2015 on a weekly. You see that?
Yeah.
So
it's back in here.
Yeah, what was the high there? 644, which is the area that we just got down to again. So this area has, to me, going back to that August of 2015, has great significance because it's shown me it has. So if we get through there, if we close under 640, we will go and challenge that 625. But I don't care about the 625. I'll be watching commodity prices to see what goes on around it.
Okay.
Yeah, much more interesting to me than the currency itself, because the currency will just be a tool.
Yeah, and I saw that the Chinese already idled some of their steel mills.
Yeah, I saw that. So again, we are seeing some interesting things going on here, and I'm glad we're seeing that. By the way. I'm really glad we're seeing that, because it's, again, the world is far more dynamic, and nobody is sitting still here. That's when I read all these, when I read the one articles, the world is not sitting still here. And that brings us back to the Fed meeting. So the people who've been getting short the bonds in a big way, yeah, they're taking some in here because, again, if you heard about extending duration, just like we saw in Europe, because again, once Lagarde last week, when she made it clear that they were going to be on top of this, let's see the rally. Let's see.
What, in the bunds?
Well, I'm going to go across the board. So I'm going to look at the Italian. Well,
all right, hold on. Let me just go to this other page so I can pull them all
let's see.
one after another.
So that's the 10th. Look at where I'm looking on the, so I put up the, the DD so I could see the June without the continuation. And look at the June BTBs are higher. Let's see the bonds, I'm sure. Oh, I don't want that continuation gap. It's going to be a problem.
You just want the dailies?
Yeah, I'm going to go to the deal. Let's see.
Okay.
Okay. So if we go, the bunds are up, marginally, nothing great. But but they did stem the sell. Look at the sell-off that we saw, before that. So but she was, again, if you go back and read her words, listen to her words, they were concerned about the movements. Unlike the Fed, they were concerned about the movements in their bond markets. That they were getting a little bit away from them, and she laid it out that they were willing to go farther in order to keep rates low, and she explained why, and they weren't worried about inflation. So we've heard it all. Well, we've heard a lot anyway. I won't say all. All's a big word with these people. So that's what I think is really important here.
Okay.
And they're going to have to speak to it, because If not, well, here's what I will tell you what will happen. If you don't hear anything, any concern whatsoever, they, meaning the sellers,
Oh, they're gonna come back, right?
oh, they'll come back. And they'll just like, just kind of like they did with his testimony on the Hill, right?
Right.
They let it go, and then boom. And then, okay, come in and stop it. And there was an article about Yellen not being concerned about rate. Oh, this morning.
Yeah, that was a great article.
Yeah, it was a good, oh, it was by Liz McCormick,
Yeah.
her and Alex used to write so many, they're just refining that was a very good article. And my problem with it though, is that again, it's static because they lay out the CBOE view, well, 20, they were laying out, well, we expect it'll go up 20 basis points a year over the next 2 or 3 years. It's already gone up 60 basis points in a month. So when you lose control of it, or let me say, or if you lose control of it, all those forecasts are meaningless. And in the article they talk about the SEP forecast, predicting 2023. I wish they would stop those, or the history of those forecasts. We'd all be broke. We'd all be broke, and that's from the best and the brightest, as we say. But we know what the best and brightest did back in the 60s. So I'm not a fan of the best and the brightest because they're neither that. They're neither the best nor the brightest. So.
Yeah. So from a technical standpoint, you guys, the technical model's down in the 30-year. It's up in the rates. So if you just think midweek shuffle, if nothing else, you're looking for a Wednesday, Thursday extreme. Tomorrow's FOMC. You're looking for an extreme tomorrow for a blow off high, and then these guys resume the trend.
Well, I'll tell you what, I really believe, and I will be trading myself. I'll be back in Arizona tomorrow. I will be trading that way, that if I hear nothing, and I mean nothing, and again, I hope the media gets their asses, gets their head out of their asses and actually asks some relevant questions, because these are important. Because the question, and at least should be asking, where's your pain threshold? I mean, if it's not coming from the financial journalists, it's really pathetic. Where's your pain threshold? And that's the question. Where do you believe your pain threshold is?
Yeah.
And the selling, and when you really think about it, there's a lot of speculative selling. This is why, if they're really concerned about it, they should go to YCC. And I say there's a lot of speculative selling because the movements in the market have been dramatic. And remember that the largest holder of bonds does not hedge itself, which is the Fed. So that is one seller removed. I can't stress the significance of that enough. So somebody is really stepping into the void here, so to speak, and really push, going, hey, and selling off. So there's a lot of leverage selling going on. And, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I agree with you. And I think these hedge funds are going to challenge them.
Oh, yeah.
They got more power.
Yeah. They are doing it. And you know what? Because, it's like Dalio's, you know what? I really, as a longtime fan of Ray Dalio, but I just have not, he used to, when he talked less, he was a lot more relevant in my mind. Now he's just saying, cash is trash, buy assets, find assets that'll do well because money is worthless. Okay, Ray, I get it. I get it. But if this is what you're, then these are the people who really should be pushing it. He should be getting short bonds, and yet the risk parity model is not built on that, by the way. Now, his macro global fund may be built on that. So we'll see a huge discrepancy, but risk parity is long. In the last methodology that I understood of it, which is why I thought they were vulnerable. In fact, I just had a discussion with one of my favorite guys, Eric Peters, who wrote a really nice article over the weekend talking about the bonds. And I wrote back to him, I said, well, in the 70s, if you were risk parity, you would have gotten destroyed because bonds got killed and the stocks went sideways to lower for the whole. So the question is, are we going to return to that? Now, I think we could, because my view emanates from China, right?
Yeah.
What the Chinese are going to do here. Because if the yuan goes higher, I think the critical significance of the yuan going higher is that China is absolutely pivoting to a much more consumer demand-based economy. And with that will end China, putting so much downward pressure. That's where I break with the Fed. I think their models are flawed. Again, because so much of their analysis is domestic, and yet I believe that it's China's influence on the world as well as with other places that became freed from the shackles of one-dimensional communist socialist types of government, and all those workers became part of the global workforce. That made so much of a difference on containing inflation. It wasn't what central banks, they were able to basically live in a vacuum and be bailed out by the influence of deflationary forces. Now, the question is, are those deflationary forces beginning to dissipate? And that's why I'm looking at the yuan. Now, you could say, well, yeah, even if the Chinese influence dissipates, we got India on the rise. Not so quick with India. India it's been a, what's the phrase that they use? It's been a great story to develop for 40 years. And it just never reaches fruition. But that, again, a lot of parts in motion here.
Yeah,
a lot of parts
there too. So Ira, did you see Ezra's question here? You want me to read it to you?
Yeah.
All right. He said, Gunlock said that farmland is the cheapest asset right now. Well, implying there's opportunity there. I would say that it's probably cheaper than garage space in Toronto. Whether it's a good investment, it's hard to tell.
We've talked about farmland with Robert, and he told me, he went through Kansas, and we talked about and Robert's been great with the ag banks,
right?
And how robust it been. He's been on as good as anybody people I read. But farmland is good, and what is it? FCI? There's a couple actual funds. I'm remiss because I looked at a couple of them to buy. Well, ag prices are good right now because beans are high. Ag prices are high. So with that, it's the same. But I could do a surrogate. And I love farmland. It's just that I'm an idiot in the way that I went about it, because it's been 17 years that I've been looking at it on and off, and then I give up on it and blah, blah, blah.
And you really got to sit on it, and you have to run it.
Yeah, but it's kind of like with China. I don't have to buy things Chinese. I buy them in Australia, because if things are booming there, the Australians are going to be benefactors of it, right?
Right.
So I would have been, and if I would have owned ag stocks, well, fertilizer stocks, we've done very well. Ag equipment stocks, we've done very well. Food companies from Bunge to Archer Daniel, we've done very well. So, and that's how I, look at myself. I say, okay, I've been so bullish, especially for the last year. We've done very well with that. Now, that rationalization? You bet it is. I'll be the first to tell you. But it was a way to play it. Again, So I play around the margins rather, because once you start owning the land, you become a landlord and you got to rent it, got to care for it. And believe me, I'd love to do it. And I've looked at it. So I know in that regards, what I'm talking about. But there's also a couple funds that are publicly listed, there are a couple of them that you should take a look at if you want to do that. Or if you want to get out there and put your name on auction lists, when land comes up for auction. But in this environment, you are bidding against farmers. And if you're closer in to urban areas, you're also now bidding against developers who are looking for land to build homes on because of the shortage of housing. So you're not getting it cheap. And you know what? I don't buy I don't buy new cars when the market's booming. I don't buy, for the most part, houses I try to buy only in downturns. So as much as I love it, I'm a little careful here. Not to say, listen, we can go to $20 beans, but then, and farmland will then go crazy, but you won't be selling it then anyway. Because if you're such a short-term player, you're better off playing the underlying commodities.
We've all been great dental floss farmers.
If you don't mind, you mentioned soybeans, and I was reading some articles where, of course, it's news articles, it could be just supposition, but reading articles that farmers are planning on planting more soybean crops to chase the rising prices and capitalize from that. Do we run the risk of having oversupply in the future when there's potentially less demand? If, let's say, China doesn't meet the goals of the phase 1 buying that was negotiated some months ago?
That's always the case. As they say in commodities, the cure to high prices is high prices. So,
okay, gotcha.
It's one of the last realms. Listen, the market does not set interest rates, right? The cost of money and everything, it's not set. The central banks have taken over that role almost completely. I'd say they own 95% of it. And the other is dependent upon them anyway, because that's what makes the more what we call shadow banking segment interesting, because people who are out, going out into I would call some dark corners and investing there and making loans there. So it's such a, who is that? That was Brian, right?
Oh, that was Ezra.
Sorry. It's a very, it's not so easy. It's not, but the cure for high prices is high prices. And that's always been the rule in the commodity world. And you always run the risk, when things get good, just like you bring up too much gold, gold prices go high, the miner, everybody starts mining. Mines that didn't make any economic sense now make economic sense. Same with farming. Land that was marginal now gets planted. So, and that's the great dynamic of capitalism. When you allow the market to, to really get involved in prices. Yeah, you go through boom and bust, and that's the inherent nature of capitalism. And they've been trying to end that without breaking the back of capitalism. They've been trying to smooth the business cycle for a long time. All right, I'm going to get going now because I got to go do some packing. I hope I covered a little bit of it, but that's what I'm looking for from the Fed tomorrow.
All right, well, have a safe trip back.
Okay. All right.
All I can say is that